Hello and welcome to The View from 4 Feet and 3 Inches. I'm your host. Oh my goodness. I'm your host, Cassidy Huff, and apparently I had a frog in my throat a second ago. I am a white woman with blonde hair that is thrown over my shoulders right now, but it is about right below shoulder length. I'm wearing a black t-shirt that says "Do Ask, Do Tell," and I am sitting on a gray couch with a gold and green pillow, or gold and green pillows behind me. There's also a bookshelf that's out of focus behind me. So today we are going to be talking about anxiety and depression, specifically my anxiety and depression. This is quite a heavy topic, so it's not like super heavy, but if you can't handle this info today, or it's a little too much for you today, please feel free to skip this episode. I won't be getting too far into detail, but I do think it's important to talk about because I know I come off very bubbly, very energetic on social media, and that is just naturally my personality. I am really that way. However, I've had a lot of anxiety and depression throughout my life, like I think most people have, and I'm on antidepressants and, all of the above. So I think it's really important to talk about, destigmatize, and not harp on it too much, but this is a topic that I don't really talk about a whole lot. So I thought it was important to do a podcast episode, a long form video on this, just because I feel like it should be talked about. So let's start from when I was a child. So I was a very happy kid. I loved life, like I think most children do. However, I was in and out of the hospital for the majority of my life. Oh, Kat is also coming into frame.
Sorry.
Sorry if you are watching. Kaz is in the room, but he does not want to be in this episode. And honestly, this episode is not really about him, so he doesn't need to be in this episode. But he is here. So yeah, I was a very happy child, but I was in and out of the hospital. So I've had surgery. I had surgery every 6 months from ages 1 to 18. And so obviously that's very anxiety inducing. I had a lot of medical trauma related to the hospital and doctors. When I was younger, I had something called white coat syndrome, where basically anytime, like I was a baby when I had this. So like anytime a person would come in with a white coat on, like a doctor white coat on, I would scream. And it didn't matter really what kind of white coat it was, but like I knew when it was a doctor in my room, and it didn't matter if I was inpatient or just there for an appointment, I would scream. So it got so bad to the point where my mom literally had to ask physicians and like doctors before coming into my room to take off their white coats so that I wouldn't scream. So I had anxiety in that way, and then obviously when I was in the hospital, I had anxiety. I knew that surgeries would help me because I was in a lot of pain before surgeries, and so surgeries were a form of pain relief for me. That's not why I had them, but because my spine likes to try and crush my internal organs without medical intervention, then when I had surgery every 6 months, it really helped improve my quality of life. Basically, it straightened my spine so that it wasn't pressing on my internal organs, and it kind of disciplined my spine in a way. So my spine forever tried to curl and to twist, but my surgeons wouldn't allow that. So I knew going into surgery that I would be in a lot less pain coming out of surgery than I was going into it. However, I had a lot of very scary experiences. I've had 43 surgeries in 22 years. And even as a child, I had a lot of fear going in for surgery because I had such bad experiences with minor things like IVs being put in, or being extubated when coming out of surgery, or my lungs collapsing, things like that. That were very traumatic, obviously, for anybody, but more so, I was young. I was really, really young. So I had a lot of anxiety surrounding surgery time because I had surgery twice a year. So I had surgery in April and October. Those were my surgery months. And so I had surgery sometime in those months. And so I knew, even when I was young and didn't understand the concept of like months. I knew when it was approaching surgery time. So like when school would start, or when people started talking about my birthday coming around, then I would get like super anxious because I knew that surgery time was right around the corner if we were talking about those things. So I was always very anxious about specifically medical things. And then also, even when I wasn't in the hospital, and I was going to say, like, even when I wasn't in the hospital, but like at school or something, then I was still very anxious because I knew I couldn't do a lot of things that my peers could do. And so I was always very anxious about getting hurt. I was hyper aware of my body. I was hyper aware of my space around me. And so I was very anxious about getting hurt, although I was kind of a daredevil and wanted to do all the things that I probably physically shouldn't be doing or physically wasn't able to do. Like I would love to go skydiving, but I know that's probably never going to happen. Things like that. Even as a child, I was very daredevilish, and I was very intent on doing things that gave me adrenaline rushes, and yet I was very scared of getting hurt. So there was kind of this ongoing battle all the time in my brain because I wanted to keep up with my peers. I wanted to play dodgeball. I wanted to play kickball. I wanted to play tetherball on, the playground. But I also knew that I couldn't because if I got hurt and fell backwards, I would have to go to the hospital, and that would cause a lot of anxiety. So I had a lot of anxiety both in and out of the hospital, just surrounding my body in general. So that's a really interesting thing that I think is really complex now that I think about it, for a child to grasp, but I think it's really interesting. So I was always very happy. I didn't really know what depression was until I got to be around a teenager, and I remember being very upset and very depressed about the fact that I was having to go in for surgeries when things like school dances were starting to happen, or things like birthday parties, or parties in general, or things like that. I remember being upset when I was a teenager and being depressed about the fact that I really didn't have a whole lot of friends in school because I was the kid who looked different. And so although I was very friendly, very outgoing at school, especially as a teenager, I tried to keep to myself a lot because I didn't really want anything to do with my peers, but I did. I wanted the normal teenage experience. However, I kind of viewed, and this is so offensive of me to think back then, but I kind of viewed my peers as below me emotionally in a way, because I was going to school, yes, but I was also working. So I would leave school and immediately go to work for theater groups in Washington State, where I grew up. And so I was going to gigs at night and performing at night, and then working these theater jobs, and also hosting things on the weekend, like galas and different things like that. And so I was getting a lot of life experience, and I was the youngest one in the room every single time. I was the only minor in the room most of the time, other than like my sister, who I dragged along with me to all these things. So I was very I kind of viewed my peers who were the same age as me as below me at school, because I was having so many different experiences, but at the same time, I wanted to be a normal teenager and do all the normal teenage stupid things, but I felt like I was smarter than that, and so I wanted to be a part of the group, but I didn't at the same time. So it was, again, like an ongoing battle of like wanting to fit in, but also not wanting anything to do with these who I viewed as like dumb kids, Kaz just brought up a really interesting point. I don't think you can hear him in the background, but he was just saying that he wants me to reiterate the fact that I've learned from that kind of thought process, because I don't think like that anymore. I don't believe that my peers are below me. I thought that was a given, but maybe it wasn't with how I was explaining things. I really did think that way. And obviously, I've grown now. I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm 22. And so I don't think that my peers are below me anymore. But when I actually started feeling equal to my peers wasn't until college. I actually started having like normal, what I view as like teenage experiences in college because I didn't have them when I was 14, 15, 16. So I did eventually get those kinds of experiences, but it wasn't until later in my life. And so I kind of felt like I was catching up to things that I had missed, because I wasn't involved really with my peers when I was a teenager. So yes, I have grown, I have learned. I do not think that my peers are dumb now, but that is how I thought genuinely a few years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so it was a really interesting time for me, mainly because I was depressed because I wanted to fit in and I didn't have friends. But at the same time, I was so involved in my own world and wanting to do my own thing that I didn't really. I was also really upset. This was a main point for me, was that I was really upset that all my friends were, or my peers were dating and I wasn't. Not because I didn't want to, mainly because one, I thought boys were stupid, and two, I still think that, but two, I didn't, people didn't like me because I was weird, right? Like I looked different, and kids are mean, and kids don't really want anything to do with people, like other kids who look different than them. So I really wanted a relationship when I saw all of these other people that were my age getting into relationships, but it just didn't happen for me. Like Kaz, who I'm with now, is my first long-term relationship. We've been together for over 2 years. We met when we were 20 and 21, and this is really my like first actual experience with dating. I was on a dating app when I met him. That's how we met. But I didn't get like a normal teenage dating experience. I never had a boyfriend throughout 12 years of public school. It wasn't until I hit college again that I was getting those normal teenage childhood kind of experiences and life experiences. And so I was depressed for a variety of reasons, because I was missing out, because I wanted things but also didn't want them, because I wanted to fit in but also didn't want to. And so it was a very confusing time for me, and I was not in therapy at this point. Again, I did not get into therapy until I was 20. So 19, 20, I don't remember. I was 19. So I had friends and like friends outside of school and like family to kind of help me go through these kinds of feelings, but I didn't really realize how far I pushed them down until I got into therapy a few years ago, and I was like, oh, I have some stuff to work through, so that was really when I started feeling depression, was when I was younger, in like teenage, like my teen years, really. I covered a lot of this. I was also bullied in school, and this is a part that I didn't cover, is that I was bullied very heavily. I'll cover this in a whole other podcast episode if you guys want me to. I've been getting a lot of comments on it very recently, not because I've been talking about my bullying experience, but because people want to know if I was bullied. And the answer is yes. I was bullied very heavily. From first grade to 12th grade, I was bullied, and it was bad. Specifically in elementary school, I think I was in like, probably from like 3rd to like 5th grade, I had somebody who was a stalker level bully, and I do not say that lightly. He was horrible to me. He like physically bullied me, to the point that like many adults had to get involved and step into the situation because it was unsafe. It was not a good time for me. And then as I grew older, it was a lot less physical bullying and a lot more bullying behind my back and just normal things like that. I feel like a lot of people have those experiences, but when you're in it, you don't think about all those other people that are also experiencing these things. You think that you're the only one on planet Earth who's ever gone through anything like this, ever. So I wasn't like, oh yeah, this is a normal teenage experience. I was like, literally no one else knows what this is like. So that was really frustrating for me. And again, kids are mean. They are not nice to each other. And I tried my best, and I still try my best to be kind to everybody, no matter who they are. But they were not nice to me. That was not reciprocated. By some people, it really was. Not by a lot of them, though. So it was a very hard, school was a very hard time for me, and I didn't really come out of my shell or have friends until college, which is kind of a sad thing to say out loud, but it's very true. Yeah, so when I was a teenager, that's when that's when I really started to identify my depression, and I was like, oh, I think this might be depression. I was a very mature kid for my age, and I was able to even be able to identify things like that. Not to toot my own horn, but I think that I knew it was depression. I just didn't really want to do anything about it, mainly because I had so many other things to be doing. And depression was not on the list. It was not on the to-do list. It was like work, do sports, eat, sleep, do homework, do it all over again. Depression was not there. And so I just kind of buried it for a long time. And the end. Like, I didn't take care of it until I was an adult and decided to start going to therapy. I was very also frustrated by my disability. And I think I've talked a lot about being frustrated by my peers. And that was true to an extent. At the same time, though, I was truly very frustrated by my body's limitations. And I say limitations very strongly. There are things that I cannot do, and there are things that I need help with doing. I like to be very independent. I like to do things by myself, but that's not always an option for me. And so I was struggling with the idea of what was going to happen in the future. And in the future, I was fine. I'm fine. I lived by myself. I lived by myself with my boyfriend, but I lived by myself for like 2 years before we got together. I went to college in a different state. Like, I moved 1,000 miles away from home. I took care of my service dog and myself for multiple years before Kaz and I moved in together. Kaz and I have a great life. We're very busy. We see lots of friends and family all the time. We have 2 fur babies. Like, we're doing well. But in my teenage years, I was questioning my future, and in an existential way, I will say that. I was very concerned about what my future would look like because of my disabilities, and I didn't know how much I was capable of doing. When I was having surgeries from the ages of 1 to 18, I was constantly like, okay, is this going to happen forever? Like, when is this going to stop? And it truly didn't look like it was ever going to stop. Like, it literally looked like I was going to have surgeries for the next 6 months, every 6 months for the rest of my life. And I couldn't let that go because that was all I knew for my entire life up to the age of 18. And so I couldn't imagine my life without the hospital or my health or my disability always being involved. And don't get me wrong, my health and my disability are still very much involved in my life. They can't not be. I'm very cautious about what situations I put myself in and what activities I do, because I do understand my body's limits. But at the time, I didn't. So at the time, I was very anxious and very depressed about the fact that I thought I was always going to have to live at home. I was adamant that the second I turned 18, I was gonna leave and I was gonna move out. Not because I hated my family, but because I was like, I had something to prove to myself and to the world. I had something to prove to myself and to the world that, like, I could survive on my own, and that surgeries weren't going to be the norm for me for my entire life, for the rest of my life, but it was really difficult to get past that. And I was always very adamant that, like, I was gonna leave and I was gonna, like, start my life away from Washington State where I lived my whole life. But in the back of my mind, I was always like, is this possible? Is this something that I can do? And I had a lot of people outside of my family, and my family was always very supportive, but I had a lot of people outside of my family be like, you'll never do that. Are you sure you want to move out? Like, is that really feasible with the way your disability is? Like, can you actually do that? And they were doubting me. And so that planted a seed in my head, and I was like, oh, I don't actually know. I hope so, but like, I didn't know my body's limitations at that point. So I was always very concerned about my future existentially and about what my life was going to become outside of my mom's house and outside of my family. And so that's another thing I was always very anxious and depressed about, was my future, about like including my disability and how that was going to play out. So early adulthood. So I moved out. I went to college. I got my degree in musical theater. I had the normal college experience, I guess, where, I went to parties, I hung out with friends, I developed a really good friendship circle, like a really good circle of friends, a really close, tight-knit circle that I'm very proud of, that I call those people my family. I went on a dating app. I went on multiple dates with multiple people. I met Kaz. We started dating. We dealt with that. And, I was having a normal experience for the first time in my life ever. And so that was very uplifting for me. I will say, though, that after I graduated college, it was a problem because I had built this life for myself surrounding school, and that's really all I knew. Like, I was at school for 12, 15 hours a day. And because I went to a conservatory for the performing arts. And so they worked us to the bone. And so that's all I did for like 2.5 years. I graduated early. And I was like, that was my whole life, was school and my friends. But my friends also were in class with me, so I got to be with them all the time. And then they were like living down the hall from me in the dorm. So I was just seeing my friends and going to class all the time. So once that was taken away and I graduated, I felt kind of stripped of my identity. Oh, I should also say that in my, I think third-ish semester of college, I started seeing a trauma-based disability therapist who's also disabled. And so that opened my world a lot to the trauma and like unpacking the trauma that I had experienced for my entire life. And so that was really essential to like my identity, because I didn't realize how much anxiety and how much trauma I was carrying around. And so being able to unpack that, I think, was essential in like figuring out who I was away from my family and separating that kind of identity. So once school ended and once I graduated, I felt kind of stripped of my identity, and it got really bad. And so I eventually I talked to my therapist, and I eventually got on Lexapro, which I'm still on, because I got really depressed. It was not good. And I was in Hollywood, the middle of Hollywood, by myself. I didn't have any transportation. I didn't have a car. I was in a 300 square foot apartment by myself with me and my dog. And it was horrible. Like, I was fine physically, but mentally, no, I was not having a fun time. So I got on Lexapro, and that's when Kaz and I moved in together. I actually moved in with his parents for like 5 months, until we found a place. And I started antidepressants. I don't think that's public knowledge. I don't know why. I haven't like been hiding it from anybody, but I don't think that I really shared that or shared my mental health journey. So that's why I'm doing this podcast right now. But yeah, I started Lexapro under a year ago. And that's been fun. I dealt with all the side effects that went along with that. It's calmed down now because I've been on it for like a year. But that was my experience with like getting on antidepressants. I was very worried that they were just going to send me to like a mental health institution and like not listen to me, but that didn't happen, and I got the help that I needed. I was very fortunate and in having those resources and having a strong circle that backed me in my decisions, and a lot of family and friends that really supported me, including Kaz, that really supported me in that journey, and I was very grateful for that. So that kind of brings me to today. Today, I feel good for the most part. I'm really stressed as far as work and everything else goes, but I'm doing really well mentally. We have a routine, or somewhat of a routine, that works for us. Routine is really important to me because that is kind of the structure of how I structure my day. So I don't like get up exactly at a certain time and go to bed exactly at a certain time every day, but just implementing small things into my routine are really, really essential for me and my well-being. So we have a routine that works for us. The school year is about to start, and Kaz is a teacher, so he's going to be gone for quite a while, or like for the majority of the day. So I am gonna have to get back to finding my routine and what works for me, and self-care things like when am I gonna shower and what time am I gonna eat and things like that. But I do my best to regulate my emotions and regulate myself when it comes to my mental health, and keeping myself busy really helps. Going to therapy once a week really helps. Staying on top of my meds really helps. Taking care of my health, like going to the gym and doing at least going on one walk a day, and making sure the animals' needs are met and things like that. That really helps me as well. So I've established what works for me, and that's where I am today. And that's been my mental health journey until this very point. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give me a 5-star rating depending on where you're watching. Tell me what you would like me to cover in future episodes. I'm kind of running out of ideas. So if you guys could help with that, that would be much appreciated. And I will see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.